welcome to Drunken Monkey Tech Thursday Throwback. I know that's really original, but that's what we're calling it.
Hey.
My name's Matt.
Hi, I'm Lee.
And this is going to be shorter form than the whole podcast that we normally do. But essentially what we do is Lee and I take some classic games, and we take an evening, and we play the crap out of them, capture some footage. If you're watching on the video, I'm also going to put this in the audio stream. But you get a chance to see some of these classic video games. We talk a little bit about the history, what they mean to us, and the different versions that we played, how those played out, so to speak. Some are created more equal than others.
It's true. It's true. Some are terribly, terribly good, and some are terribly, terribly not.
Yeah. So our first version of this, we've got footage for tons of games.
We do.
I should point out, by the way, that in the future, if you'd like to contribute to our Patreon, which if you're watching the video, it's right there. But if you go to www.patreon.com/drunkenmonkeytech, it'll get you right there. Any patron, $1 or more will in the future get to answer polls if they'd like and help us select from a list that we will provide, of course, because we got to capture it way in advance. But you'll be able to help select what game gets covered in the next one. Or on our Tuesday show, Trophy Tuesday, you'll be able to help us decide what content we have. So there is a bonus there. Plus, we're going to add some other bonus stuff there as well. So check that out. But our first Throwback Thursday is going to be the Nintendo classic, yes, Popeye. You probably saw that in the heading and probably already knew that. But yeah, we're going to cover Popeye, and this is from 1982. If you're watching the video stream, you can actually see it says copyright 1982. It says two interesting things: 1982 Nintendo, and this is a splash screen from the arcade game, but also 1982 King Features Syndicate. Now, a little bit of history with this game. Shigeru Miyamoto, legendary figure in Nintendo history.
Absolutely.
He brought us Mario, he brought us Zelda, he brought us
our childhood.
Wii music. Okay, well, we'll forgive him that. But he he brought us a lot of stuff. I ran into him and knocked him over at E3 one year, and he was such a nice guy, even though he wasn't his translator. He's telling me, it's okay, it was an accident. But really nice guy. He had designed some things for Nintendo and wanted to do a Popeye game. He's got a fascination with Popeye.
Who doesn't?
Well,
I'd gladly pay you Tuesday.
It's so misogynist and
it was
violent by today's standards. Kids don't know the glory of Popeye. And sometimes racist, admittedly.
Oh, yeah.
But the cartoons were part of my childhood.
Unfortunately, it was part of the era. It's like watching soap operas, the nighttime soap operas from the late 80s. Oh, they were bad. Any of the sitcoms from that era.
Yeah. Now, Popeye, the video game, came after things started to take off. But when he wanted to do a Popeye game for Nintendo, King Features Syndicate, who owns the rights to Popeye, wouldn't let him do it. He's going, video games.
Really?
They wouldn't let him do a Popeye game.
Oh.
He had already designed the game, everything but the graphics, how it was going to work, and everything else. And his storyline was Bluto. The bad guy in
He's
Popeye.
The bad guy, trying to steal the girl all the time.
He steals olive oil.
Yeah.
Takes her to the top of a building.
Wait, this is starting to sound familiar.
It is. And Popeye has to find his way up there as he rolls barrels down at him and things like that. And he can jump up.
Not barrels. He throws beer bottles at him, and so does the hag.
Well, we're talking the original concept. And so as he's working his way up this building to get to Bluto and save olive oil, he can grab cans of spinach, which makes it so he can punch the barrels that are rolling down at him.
Oh.
And King Feature said, nope, video games? What? Video games? At that point in time, nobody was licensing likenesses for video games.
Yeah.
Or any properties for video games.
It
was a fad. And then along came
A
Pac-Man.
waste of time.
Space Invaders and Pac-Man really took off. And then the third in the triumvirate to really get arcade games started was Donkey Kong. And Donkey Kong was originally going to be Popeye. If King Features had not turned down Shigeru Miyamoto and Nintendo, we never would have gotten Mario.
So this is a totally M&M's and Reese's Pieces feature thing here.
Yeah. So he went. Shigeru Miyamoto went and made Donkey Kong, and the rest is history. But after all that, and after Donkey Kong got so huge, King Features kind of went to Nintendo and said, "Okay, you can make a game with the Popeye license. We'll license it to you."
Sorry, we were stupid.
Yeah. So what came out of that was Popeye, and it is in fact an arcade game, and it's actually a pretty good game.
Oh yeah,
damn good game actually.
A lot of fun.
So I'm going to switch to the arcade footage if you're watching the video stream, and. When was the first time you saw this, Lee? Do you remember?
Oh, good Lord.
I can say exactly what it was.
I can't. I wish I could. But early 80s in an actual arcade, this is one of those games that it wasn't my favorite game. I have to say that. This was one of those games that I was like, okay, I can play this while I'm waiting for my quarters to come up on my favorite games. And I'm sorry, but if you're from our area, you'll understand what that means.
Oh, everyone understands that. I'm not
sure that little kids understand that, or young people.
Well, I'll give a plug just because I like the guy, but Colin Moriarty, formerly of Kind of Funny Games, he went and started a new thing, and it's called Colin's Last Stand. Oh. And one of his podcasts is something called Knockback, that he does with his brother, and they talk about nostalgia things. They talk about horror movies that scared them, video games they loved. They did a whole episode on Street Fighter 2, and cool. It's really good. But they in their episode about Street Fighter 2 in the arcade, they actually mentioned it was the first game where they saw people putting quarters up. So it's not a Utah thing.
Well,
it is a universal
No, I knew
thing.
It wasn't a Utah thing.
Okay.
I didn't start playing games here. I was not here during that time frame.
Yeah, he was in Long Island.
I was in other
that.
places, yeah. And so for me, I mean, I think the generations that have played pool, they understand the term, because you do the same thing with pool. If somebody's got the table, you put your quarters down.
Yeah,
and
that's where I understood it.
When their game is up, then it's your turn. Well, the same thing happened in arcades. If you wanted to play a game and somebody else was on your game, you walked up and put quarters on the screen, so it like rested against the screen, down against the little lip right there, and you waited in line. You laid your quarters down. You got next game, and that was like unwritten rule back in the day, right? Even if they were one of those kids that just wanted to stand there and play all day, they would walk away if they didn't put their quarters up first. They would walk away and let you have it.
All right.
So
for those of you watching the footage, we're about
one of
through
those
the
games.
arcade footage, so I'm gonna throw something up real quick, which is this actually was ported to other systems.
Yeah.
You're looking at the game box for the Atari 2600, which we'll talk about in a moment.
Actually, that one wasn't as bad as I expected it to be.
But we get some interesting things. But real quick, the first time I saw Popeye, the video game, I have to say, a lot of games that we'll talk about on this show, I saw for the first time in a fucking Pizza Hut.
Yeah, no,
in
great
Roy,
place
Utah.
for games, yeah.
They always had, as you came in the door, you had the jukebox on the left, at least in that location. But most locations back in the 70s and 80s were the same. On the left, you had the jukebox as you came in. On the right, you had a stand-up arcade game, and then you had a booth without a table where people sat to wait for their pizzas that they ordered that they were taking out.
God,
and
that was back when all the booths had the checkered tables in them. So
back when Pizza Hut had dine-in locations. I don't know in this area where there are any.
No, the last time I was in a dine-in location, I had taken my daughter up to Montana, and they have a dine-in location that still has the checkerboard table. So we laid out straws and got out pennies and nickels, and we played checkers while we waited for our pizza.
So it used to be an open booth while you waited. And then one day they put an arcade game there as well, and it was Pac-Man. It was a cocktail table, which when I bought my first arcade machine, yes, there is one in the house.
Right.
It is a Pac-Man machine, and there was a Pac-Man machine there. Controls on either end. It's a table.
Yeah. Screen facing up towards the ceiling. I remember those.
And
all right, there's one in the other room.
Yeah,
but I still remembered them before that.
But my previous wife, I told her I was buying an arcade machine, and she kind of lost it. There's a reason why she's an ex. But I insisted that the arcade machine that I get, if I only ever owned one, it was Pac-Man, because that was the first time I'd seen a cocktail table, and I wanted a cocktail table, and I had fond memories of that. We own one.
Yep.
Love that fucker. But Pac-Man was actually eventually replaced by Galaxian, the precursor to Galaga. And then it was replaced by, I'm trying to remember which one it was. I think it was Joust. I think there might have been a Joust cocktail table. But the stand-up machine went through a quicker evolution, and I think because they made more stand-up machines. So the first time I saw Popeye was a stand-up machine in a Pizza Hut, in that Pizza Hut.
Nice.
And it had actually replaced Donkey Kong, which had replaced Elevator Action, which had replaced Space Invaders. But that's the first time I saw it. And I did not understand the game, and I didn't, because I played Donkey Kong, and it's a Nintendo game. I did not understand why you couldn't jump.
Yeah.
And it gave me fits.
God, the lack of jump was frustrating in that era.
But,
because that's all you used to have was jump and fire.
Yeah.
You had jump and you had fire.
Now you have punch, and that's it.
Now you have punch and fire. Yeah. Well, punch,
and that's it.
No, it is. It's punch. Yeah. Pretty much. That's it.
But
no jump. No
so that's
fire.
the first place I saw it, and then it got ported to everything.
Yeah.
Shall we step through some of these?
Sure. Let's look at it.
All right. So we're already looking at the box art for the Atari 2600. I owned this for my Atari 2600 back in the day.
I did know.
I will admit, we have a lot of classic systems. We have a lot of games. Our collection would scare a lot of people. Some things are emulated. We're doing a Billy Mitchell. It's just practical
so much easier,
purposes.
Guys.
For example, if I'm going to grab some Dreamcast footage, there's no elegant. I mean, I've got HDMI and component capture equipment, but I can't get footage off of a composite, so I can't hook my goddamn Dreamcast up to capture footage. We may have to emulate it.
There's also,
is.
we have a Colecovision still in the garage that will play 2600 games, but
we
sadly,
have every generation of PlayStation.
And everybody who's from our era will know this. Sadly, the little box that switches from TV to video game, I had to strip those wires every couple of years to make them attached to the back of my television at in the UHV or UHF antenna port so I could switch, and eventually I had no cords left coming out of my box. So it wasn't until very recently your brother actually gave me a TV switch box, so I could conceivably now go find my system and hook it up. But
I wish you'd said something, because I could make one with a couple of dollars worth of parts from Radio Shack.
It's speaker wire, but it was sad to me that I just couldn't do it.
So right now we are looking at the Atari 2600 version of this. And if you're watching the video at home, you may notice some weirdness.
Yeah, it flickers.
The flickers. Kind of and it was most prominent in Pac-Man for the Atari 2600. And it kind of made things annoying. Sometimes things would completely disappear. Because of the limited RAM of the Atari 2600, the limited everything of the Atari 2600, they would not draw everything on the screen every single time, every single frame. They would alternate. They'd say, okay, like for Popeye, I'm going to draw Bluto on frame 1, and then 4 frames later, and then not again, and draw him again 4 frames later. And other things that are flickering, like beer bottles, I'll draw them on frame 2. So it goes around. And as you watch this captured footage on these shows, you watch this
technology.
on this, you'll notice, because we're capturing at 30 frames a second, and these are actually 29.97 frames a second. I know it doesn't
Don't
make sense.
ask why he
But
knows.
occasionally things will completely disappear. Our footage for Joust. We do
Yeah,
have the
we
footage for
tried.
Joust. Sometimes you'll see the platforms, but nothing
Sometimes
else.
not so much.
Sometimes you'll see the eggs and nothing else. Sometimes
Yeah.
you'll see yourself and nothing else. Sometimes you'll see the enemies and nothing else. It gets really, really fucking weird.
Which sucks because, and sorry, deviation from Popeye, that version of Joust was amazing.
Yeah.
That worked so well.
We
But the
will talk
footage
about
sucked.
Joust.
We will.
But Joust for the Atari 2600 did not, in fact, suck.
No, it was great.
So,
This one, it's really weird because when we started playing this one, the flicker's prominent, but that doesn't actually bother me. It took me a minute to figure out that was a spinach can blinking on the side.
that little
Yeah.
block
And then
that
you
flashes.
turn red instead of green, and you get all raged. Kick Brutus's ass for a second, and then the beer bottles also flicker. So the
Yeah.
very first time one hits me in this, I had no idea.
Some
That's
games
what
were
was
really
coming.
bad about it because they also would turn off hit detection when it was flickering.
Yeah.
And so you could conceivably at different points walk through an enemy.
Absolutely. There
And
were
not
some
be touched.
There were some glitchy features
Atari
to the
2600 was-
2600.
A little bit different.
Yeah. There were times when, playing Pitfall, you'd walk through an alligator.
Yeah. I will say the Activision games were really good about
They
that,
were.
though.
They were really good about it.
All right. So, I'm going to throw up the screenshot of the Atari 5200 version of the box for Popeye, and it looks the same.
It does. It's remarkably exact.
Yeah. So let's look at some footage there. If you look, the flicker is gone.
Yeah.
Completely gone.
And, oh, wow. Why
And
did
you
they
get the
make
punching
those
bag
purple?
back. And
It
the
is really
Sea
hard-
Hags in this one,
Yeah,
which
but
the
it's
Sea
really
Hag
hard
wasn't
to
in
see the
2600.
platforms. They're purple.
Yeah.
So, like, your ground is gone.
Yeah, it's
Ooh, it's got the bucket, too. The last version
Yeah.
didn't have the bucket, and the
Yeah.
arcade version does.
where you can hit the punching
Yeah.
bag.
You hit the punching bag, knock the
Right.
bucket down onto him, and you get, like, a few moments of free play where you can just run through him and past him,
And
and
a
it doesn't hurt you.
Fuck ton of points.
Yes. Oh, yeah, if you can hit him in the head. There's also the ladder issue.
So up until this point, the arcade game, the 2600, the 5200, the ladder does not, that's in the middle of the screen, does not connect all the way through.
Nope,
Which means you
you
can
go
go down,
down.
but you can't go up because why?
He chose
can't jump.
down.
The sound effect was perfect for that. But so that was the
Oh.
5200 version. And we also, about the same time, I think the Coleco might have been a little bit.
My
before that.
Coleco would play 2600.
You had one of the hybrid systems.
Oh, okay.
That was a bootleg system. Those are worth some
Really?
money at this point because
Oh, I didn't know
lawsuits
that.
happened over that.
Oh.
We should do a whole episode on that.
That was why I got it, was because I failed to have a 2600, and all of a sudden somebody had this thing they wanted to get rid of, and it would play 2600 cartridges.
Strangely enough, before the
So-
Sega Genesis, I never owned an Atari 2600 until much, much later.
Yeah.
When the 2600 was a big thing, and it was like
I had a friend.
it was like $100. Well, I had friends, and I went over to their house, but it was like
Yeah.
$100 for that.
Yeah.
Now, inflation, guys,
Hey, that was
we're
crazy
aging.
money.
It was crazy money.
That was crazy money back then for
But
a game.
for like $40, there was another system. The joysticks sucked. They were. It was called the Genesis.
Yeah, I remember
That's
the Genesis.
and it wasn't the
I didn't
Sega
have one.
Genesis. It was a different system called the Genesis, and there were lawsuits over this as well. And it also, it just played Atari 2600 games. They hadn't closed that loophole yet, so it was an Atari 2600 clone, but it came with these really tiny joysticks. There
Are
was a
they like
bonus
a
because it had
knob
a
instead
button
of-
on either side, which was nice. You could hit with your, put it in your left hand. You could hit with your thumb and your index finger. You'll visualize
Or
this. We haven't
one
got a
or the
camera
other.
going. And the joystick was this little nub in the middle.
I do remember the nub joystick.
And
it was terrible.
if you've ever like pulled the knob off your stereo and it's got those lined, that lined little stub
yeah.
underneath.
Do you really want to get pliers for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly what the joystick was. So after like 5 minutes, you're wearing the skin off your thumb and index finger on your right hand.
Oh, that's bad.
Yeah, it was bad. That was my Atari 2600 until much later. But I'm going to fire up the footage for the Colecovision. And, this is about the same time as the 5200, but the 5200 was so fucking expensive. But the ColecoVision was so much better than the Atari 2600. There's no flickering here. You get the C-Hag. You get the barrel.
This is the first time we get to see the C-Hag. We had stuff flying at us, but it was always Brutus.
Where did that come from? Although Lee, while we were playing this, did notice that on the Coleco version, the C-Hag and olive oil are the same.
Yeah,
the same thing,
colors.
just a palette swap. It's like the difference between Scorpion and Sub-Zero and
Why
Mortal Kombat.
recreate your assets? Come on.
But, and then the last one we've got to take a look at is the NES version. And the box, for a change, looks completely different.
Look at that.
But they put a pixelated picture on there because it was an arcade classic.
Yeah, they wanted to fit in.
Yeah, I guess so.
They wanted to get those 8-bit people back.
So, the footage on here, some really different things here.
This was impressive graphics for this era.
Yeah,
we were so jazzed.
It looks just as good, if not better in some ways, than the arcade edition, which that didn't happen for a very long time for those of us who grew up in the arcade age. But everything from the arcade game is actually here. No stutters, no anything. I mean, it looks beautiful.
Ladder.
But yeah, the big thing is you get a full ladder. I'm going to just let this run because I don't think we've gotten to the second level on any of the footage yet.
Oh, no, huh?
You get all the way to the third level on this. You were playing.
Yeah.
But with that ladder being open up, it so you can go up and down, makes a huge difference.
It makes a huge difference against this bad guy. Just being able to bypass him or go up when you know. And the spinach is not, a small rectangle.
It's flickering.
It actually
sometimes there, sometimes not.
Yeah, but
it's
actually,
not right there. I bet you wish you could have jumped.
Yeah, that would have been nice.
But
jumping would have made this much easier.
From my standpoint, there's always the arcade version is for purists, and I get that. But I think the definitive and the best version of this game, strangely enough, is the NES version.
I think it might be. I originally played it on arcade, so I was not introduced to the NES version until much, much later. And that ladder really does make a huge difference in strategy. Being able to come up in the middle when he's not expecting you, or go down and come back up quickly to get your hearts.
Like that.
Yeah, because, it was all about getting all the hearts you needed from Olive and beating Brutus, right?
So now we've moved on to the second stage. Now, strangely enough, almost every version of this actually had all 3 levels.
Yeah.
Which was unusual.
What's
Very unusual.
Funny is that they chose to do musical notes for the second level, and Olive Oil is a notoriously bad singer.
He's large.
It's terrible.
Oh, there's a throwback to the Robin Williams movie. He's large.
Yeah, well, I think they were given the throwback homage because literally from the old cartoons, the
I bet you Shelley Duvall could actually sing in real life.
She could. She did a horrible job on purpose, and it was fantastic for this character.
I have to say, I actually have fond memories of the Popeye movie.
I do too. It was fun.
Robin Williams, Shelley Duvall. It was actually not bad.
Interestingly enough,
I don't think they needed to make it a
we're
musical.
missing Otis. In that last level you just saw.
Oh, you mean
not Otis, sorry.
That's Mayberry. That's
yeah. The fat guy. I'd gladly pay you Tuesday, sorry.
Wimpy.
Wimpy.
Yeah, in the arcade game.
Was actually on the other side of that platform.
And you could go off, and there was a teeter-totter that you could fall off onto, and he'd jump you up.
And in that version, you can jump off onto the teeter-totter, and it will bounce you up high and put you back up on the top levels.
But he's not sitting down there.
You don't have him down there. Yeah. So that was definitely an upgrade. I thought it was hilarious that this time you're not collecting notes, you're collecting help. Yes. She's up there screaming help.
And as you watch this video footage, this is the end screen, because if you... We didn't get that far. No. We could have, but...
It would have taken a minute. It's been a while since I played this.
Okay, Lee could have, because she's actually, for this game, she played all the footage you see is Lee. I have played. But, I don't know. I really like the game. I have fond memories of it. I had kind of completely forgotten about it.
Yeah, this is one of those that I don't really think of. It's not really a go-to, but God, I had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we kind of want to keep these short as video subjects and just reminiscing. So we have a lot of them lined up. Don't forget to go to our Patreon site.
Absolutely. Help us pick new games to play. Well, old games to play.
Plus, everything that's going to be involved there with Trophy Tuesday, the regular podcast, our news update that's going to be weekly. We got a lot of stuff coming. And if you want to help pick some of the content and interact with us, although, okay, you can interact with us. Yeah, but I'm going to go over here so that they can see all the pimpage. But, our Patreon site, patreon.com, Drunken Monkey Tack. If you want to reach us by email, dmtpodcast@bagofmadbastards.com. You want to reach me individually? My email address is matt@bagofmadbastards.com.
And mine is lee@bagofmadbastards.com.
Yeah, imagine that. Or you can get us both with the DMT Podcast email. We do have a Facebook page. Imagine that. Just go on Facebook and search for Drunken Monkey Tech. You will, in fact, find it. And are we covering everything?
I think we're good for
one last thing. If you can't find this stuff, you didn't write it down, you were watching the video, and you got lost. Okay, too late now. But you can always go to www.bagofmadbastards.com, and it's kind of a container for all of our properties, all the wonderful things we do. Just click on Drunken Monkey Tech up at the top, and it'll give you links to absolutely everything, even the audio podcast that you can subscribe to via RSS. Everything's there. You'll really, really like it. So we will talk to you next week with more retro gaming. My name's Matt.
And I'm Lee.
Bye.
Bye.